Welcome to D&D Builds, where usually we make all sorts of ridiculous characters, but Dungeons & Dragons and Wizards of the Coast just released their 1 D&D playtest material. This is going to be the future of what Dungeons & Dragons gameplay is going to be all about. So I combed through this playtest material right away, and I want to run through the 5 best and worst things in this playtest material. This is going to set the precedent for how Dungeons & Dragons works in the future, so I really wanted to give it a careful read. And if you wait till the end, I'll share a very special major red flag in this playtest material because there's something that I think was just overlooked in the wording, and I'm really hoping they fix it in the future. There are some big changes and some small changes, but all of them have a pretty big impact in how this works. Let's start off with a positive. Number 1, the races. They're handled a bit differently in this playtest material, and in 1 D&D, there's no more ability score improvements based off of race. It's going to be based off your background in the future, which I kind of like. It makes it so you're less stuck into one type of mindset. You no longer think, all right, orcs are good at strength, I should probably make it a barbarian. They already started making this adjustment in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but this is making it a bit more official and a bit more commonplace, and I appreciate it. And they made some very specific adjustments to the abilities with orcs and Drow Elves. Drow Elves no longer get sunlight sensitivity, and frankly, I do kind of like how some races have some downsides, like sunlight sensitivity, but I totally acknowledge why they did this. I mean, I myself have been hesitant to play a Drow in the past because I don't want to deal with having disadvantage on anything while I'm in direct sunlight. I mean, that's kind of a pain to deal with, so I am happy they took this out. And on the side of orcs, an adrenaline rush ability, allowing you to use your bonus action to take the dash action and get some temporary hit points. Something I find a bit more neutral about the new race options is there are a few normal trade-offs. For example, dwarves used to be able to ignore strength requirements for heavy armor, but that made them a little more specialized into tanks or people that wear heavy armor and want to be able to ignore that. So they removed this feature altogether, and they boosted up their stone cutting. So now it's not just about knowing how stones are cut, it actually adds in a feature for tremor sense. If you're on top of stone or rock or whatever, you can feel in the ground if something is moving nearby. And that's kind of cool. It's definitely a flat, even trade-off, so it's definitely more of a neutral category. But on the negative side, I gotta talk about the humans. They now included a default feature called Resourceful, so humans get inspiration whenever they finish a long rest. I have my own problems with how inspiration is handled in this playtest material, but I'll jump into that in a second. But jumping back into positives, I actually really like the new backgrounds. And I know I totally crapped on backgrounds with how they were introduced in Spelljammer, and also how they were kind of introduced with Strixhaven as well, but this totally fleshes them out more in this playtest material. Now they're much more standardized and you can customize them a bit more easily. Every one of them gives the exact same thing, and it can be customized to your liking. They give a handful of sample backgrounds that you can choose from, which are just kind of defaults, but you can modify them as you'd like. Every background comes with a boost to either one ability score improvement for 2 points, and another ability score improvement for 1 point, or 3 ability score improvements for 1 point each. Every background also grants you 2 skill proficiencies, 1 language, and 1 tool proficiency. And on top of that, you also get 50 gold pieces that you can use towards any particular type of equipment, or just take it as cold hard cash. But if you've seen my Spelljammer is broken video, you might know that the second worst thing in this playtest material is that feats are automatically included with backgrounds now. And I know I mentioned this slightly in my Spelljammer is broken video, but there's a bit more reasoning to it. And I will totally back it up with some evidence so that way it gives a little more credibility. Feats are definitely handled a bit differently in this playtest material, so it's not as bad, but it's still a bit of an issue in my opinion. Which leads to my number 3 best part of this 1 D&D playtest material, and that's the feats. So while I have a bit of a problem with how these feats are being included in backgrounds, the adjustment to the feats is actually pretty cool. They added a bunch of new feats, they've modified a handful of existing feats, and they added a lot more balance to them by doing so. And because they're being included in backgrounds, they did add a level requirement for most feats now. And this is something I actually really like, because if you add a feat too early in the game, it can throw off the balance quite a bit. And if you establish that certain feats should be taken later, you kind of know this is something to look out for. So I understand these requirements and I really appreciate them. But now I want to jump into the third worst part of this 1D&D playtest material. I talked a bit about how including feats in backgrounds, especially in the Spelljammer is Broken video, breaks some parts of the game. And I want to elaborate on that a bit, especially here, because including certain feats so easily does throw certain dynamics of the game completely out the window. For example, if you are a dwarf and you have the tough feat, which you can get from Spelljammer as a wild spacer, or very easily at first level with any background in this playtest material, and then you happen to be a draconic sorcerer, you now have the equivalent of 8 points of extra constitution worth of health. And that is a pretty massive boost, to say the least. And they've also continuously mentioned that skilled was going to be something that they included as a first level feat. And while I understand it because it's simplicity, it does throw one thing a little out of whack. That's the bards. One of the major features of being a bard is jack of all trades, allowing you to add half of your proficiency bonus to any skill that you're not proficient in. But with the skilled feat, you get proficiency in 3 additional skills. So now the Jack of all trades feature becomes far less useful. This does throw off a bit of the dynamic and the balance in the game. It makes it so bards are a little less sought after, and that is a bit of an issue in my opinion. It's not the end of the world, but it's something that might be worth considering in your campaign or as these playtest materials go on and expand. And again, in these feats, they threw in the inspiration mechanic again. And that's what I want to talk about next as the number 4 worst part about this playtest material. Inspiration has been adjusted a bit. It was a bit more vague in the older books of D&D, so I totally understand why they clarified it, because usually it's just at the dungeon master's discretion. It's just, here you go, you did something cool, here's inspiration. And personally, that's kind of how I liked it. But they included it with the musician feat, so now you can play some music and give somebody inspiration, which I guess kind of leans towards the old inspiring leader feat that was in the past. But that just gave temporary hit points and totally connected to your charisma. This is actually giving inspiration, just like how it's tied to being a human as a race. And I don't really like this because it takes away some of the direct contribution of being a dungeon master. It makes it a bit more of a condition, and you can use this role whenever. And that's kind of how it worked before, but now it's a little less up to the DM whether or not they want to use it. So if you want to be a human, then you need to find some way to replace that if you really want to keep inspiration in control of the DM. I don't know, I'm just not really a huge fan of how they're adjusting inspiration to work and how it's included in other aspects of the game. But because it's kind of treated a bit more as a condition now, that leads to the number 4 best thing in this playtest material, and that's the updates to some of the conditions. They added a condition for slowed, which I kind of wish was a thing earlier. I mean, now there's very specific, like, hey, you're slowed down, you have disadvantage on dexterity saves, things like that. It was something that was kind of in the background and in people's minds, but this actually makes it a bit more solidified, and I really like this condition being included in D&D. I can't wait for it to be included in certain spells and abilities and see how it really works. There's also some additional updates to being grappled or incapacitated. They added some clarification on this, and when it comes to being grappled, now you don't need to specifically use acrobatics or athletics when it comes to resisting being grappled. It's just a saving throw. And I like this because it doesn't require some special proficiency, and it doesn't require you to worry about that skill when you're building out your character if they're very combat heavy. But it also boosts up how grappled works a little more. I didn't really like how grappled worked as much in basic D&D 5th edition, But this makes it so being a grappler feels a bit better. It leads a little more towards being restrained because you have disadvantage on attack rolls that you make if you're grappled, and restrained still has some additional benefits if you want to go full-blown restraining somebody. Overall, I like this update, and I really hope that it leads to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu monk. I've been waiting for it for a really long time. Please include it, Wizards of the Coast. I know they kind of touched on it with the Astral Arms monk being able to make strength checks with their wisdom, but I want a full-blown Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu monk. Just give it to me. There's also some additional clarification for how unarmed strikes work, and it allows you to shove or whatnot if you're doing unarmed strikes. And now the fifth best and worst part of this playtest material is the updates to the spell list. This totally changes how spell lists work in D&D. Now, instead of a spell list for druids, for rangers, for paladins, and for every possible spellcaster you have, now there's only 3 spell lists. There's the arcane, the divine, and the primal. Arcane is what you normally think of as a spellcaster. This is going to cover the bards, the wizards, the sorcerers, the warlocks, and all of them are going to be using the same spell list, while the divine spell list are going to be used by paladins and clerics. Meanwhile, the primal is much more about the natural spell casting, so this is going to be just druids and rangers. Overall, I love this change because it does make sense and it adds some massive benefits to certain classes. I've been going nuts about the fact that not all paladins have access to something like spiritual weapon or spirit guardians, and those are massive boosts to being a paladin. Especially spirit guardians, paladins are made to be frontline fighters, and that's one of the best frontline spells you can cast. It does damage and a huge aura around you, which is something that paladins already use a lot, are auras, and it slows everybody in that aura, so it's perfect for a tank and not letting people get away from you. The thing that makes this also the 5th worst part about the playtest material is how this works for some of the spellcasting classes. I mean, there are classes like Cleric who, as part of their Cleric subclass or Divine Domain, would get some expanded spell lists, like the Nature Cleric diving into more Druid spells, or something like the Arcana Cleric getting more Wizard spells. That's fairly straightforward. But one of the big issues here is that something like a Warlock specifically has an expanded spell list based on their subclasses, and most of those spells come from the wizard or sorcerer spell list. So some subclasses suddenly become a bit less sought after. I mean, I don't know too many warlocks that went with a fiend patron other than to get something like Fireball. And now they get that anyways, so it takes away from some of the purpose of going that route. They do still get some other bonuses, so if they want it for flavor, they can still do that, but it does hurt the subclass a little bit. And again, with being a warlock, it also makes it so you get Find Familiar as a warlock, so having Pact of the Chain is already less useful again. Either way, I know this is just the first release, and there's still going to be plenty of fine-tuning to be done. But that does lead to the biggest red flag I see with this playtest material. I think it was just something overlooked, and it's partially just written in the wording, but if it's not something that's clarified, I would be a little worried. And that's how critical hits are being handled. So in the critical hits section, they mentioned that critical hits are done with weapons and unarmed strikes. They don't mention spells at all. So those wizards that were really hoping for a critical hit on that firebolt, suddenly they become impossible. So I'm hoping that this was just a blatant oversight, but if I can't critical hit with my firebolt, I'm going to be really disappointed. If you've read this playtest material, let me know what you think. I'm actually really excited about some of the changes coming. I hope they get fleshed out a bit more, and I'm super excited for how they're building out an online play system for Dungeons & Dragons directly now. It looks super well done, and I can't wait to test it out. Let me know what you think about those playtest material in the comments down below. And if you want to chat more about it, feel free to check out our Discord linked in the description. We're on there pretty much all the time, chatting about D&D stuff or all sorts of ridiculous builds, which is what I do mostly on this channel. I make all sorts of ridiculous characters built for Dungeons & Dragons. And if you want access to the character sheets for those builds, or more say in what I do build or what I make videos about, feel free to check out my Patreon like these incredible people here. They help me make these videos and they're so freaking awesome. And I gotta give a special shout out to Kilo, Devin Happy, and Jason Willowhammer, who are my Dungeon Master level patrons. They go above and beyond, and for Dungeon Master level patrons, I'll be DMing a D&D session for them very soon, which you can find streaming on YouTube and Twitch in the very near future. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, let me know by hitting that like button, and I'll be here hoping you roll at least 3 nat 20s in your next D&D session, especially if you plan on using any of this playtest material, because I can't wait to test it out.